Greetings, Zogling. Well, you're in Man's Wrath Plains across the Zog Plain here in the open air, coast to coast nut house we call Zog Babylon, the third and the final. But this particular 4th of October 2022 show of Mad Dog's Musings is aimed mainly at the lost and found sheep of the house of Israel, your chosen seed of Israel's race. Ye who did hear Christ call, greetings. What we're all doing is we're living in a world of decline, and one of the main things, I'm going to go ahead, the item for today, the current event for today, is that North Korea fired yet another missile right over Japan, that landed in the other sea. Now, back in 2017, what the North Koreans did is that they took what was, essentially a theater ballistic missile, which would reach maybe from North Korea to Anchorage, and then they fired, I think, 5 more off or 4 more off. And what they would do is they'd put more fuel to go ahead and lift it higher, a ballistic missile higher above the atmosphere, to go ahead and come down in an arc. And at the end of 4 or 5 missiles, pretty well what they had is that they had a missile which would go over 12,000 miles, which would hit Key West and, or Miami and Florida, is what it would do from North Korea. So once they were able to, pretty well go over 12,500 miles, they don't need to go any further. Because there's no other place. There's no other place on the globe which is beyond their range once they get beyond 12,500 here. So you had all these people running around like chickens with their heads cut off, and they say, what did you know, Martin? You used to be in a nuclear missile battery, the Charlie Battery, 2nd Battalion, 42nd Field Artillery. You were in the fire direction control. You were targeting these things. Of course, the Lance usually had a maximum range of a little bit over 100 miles, but actually most of the shots would be about 75 miles into what was then East Germany or Czechoslovakia, because Austria was neutral. Thanks to Joseph Stalin here, but that's another event here. And I point out is that, look, they talked about, at the end of JFK against Richard Nixon, talking about a missile gap. And folks, actually, we did capture the best rocket scientists, Wernher von Braun and the rest, but the Germans, the Russians captured some too. And actuality, you go ahead and look, is that around 1955, the Russians were, actually sending the first intercontinental, we had bombers, the Russians were sending, working on, in the steppes of Asia, around Kazakhstan or whatever, they were sending out these missiles which would be far more than a B-1. And they were working on the B-2. And they were, of course, working on the guidance systems too. And initially, they, it wasn't all that good, but they were actually working ahead of us. But then we, of course, found out about that, and we knew they had nuclear weapons. And so we, pretty well ZOG went at Huntsville Arsenal and started creating these battlefield nukes here. The Russians came up with the Scuds, which were actually, even by the time of Saddam Hussein, were not very accurate at all. They were really not much better than a B-1. But we had the Lance here by this time, and but first we went ahead and had the, I think the Corporal missile, and then the Sergeant missile, and then they were doing away with the Honest John missile, which was in Korea and which was in Germany. And they took out the Honest Johns and replace them with the Lance, and it was supposedly within 10 meters. It had a variable yield nuclear warhead, which could, most of the time when we were, test firing it, we'd fire it, about less than a kilogram of TNT. It was essentially just a pop shell here, but you could go ahead and dial it up to about 100 tons, 100,000 tons. 100,000 tons of TO, kilotons of TNT, which was essentially 5 times of Hiroshima. Hiroshima was 20,000 tons TNT, and it certainly treated the Japanese pretty bad. One was U-235 plutonium, U-235 uranium. The other was plutonium. But guess what? We didn't develop the Lance until what? 40 some years, and a lot of testing and trial here, until 1970. So it took us 30 some years of working here, and that's why I told people, so they got good news and bad news. The good news is that the North Koreans are the client, kingdom, or military dictatorship, or whatever. Kingdom, really, you could call it kingdom, because you have the, the Kim Il whatever, Sung Jung whatever family running it. And what happens is that they are the client kingdoms or states of the communist Chinese. And what they do is that some of the things they do on behalf of the Koreans. Some things not so much. But what happens? The Koreans gave them the technology, the guidance systems. The guidance systems weren't just developed in 18 months by the North Koreans. No, they were having Chinese help. I don't know if they were having Russian help or not. But what happens? The North Koreans went ahead and fired, after 5 years, and getting along with Trump after calling names here, they became, Trump and, little dog ear became, butthole buddies. And now you have Senile Joe, and guess what? He has no respect for Senile Joe. So the main thing in firing that was to go ahead and do with testing. You have to go ahead and do testing. The Russians have done that, have done their testing, and so have the North Koreans. And so they have done the testing. They have gone ahead and blown these weapons. And so they're definitely doing whatever they can or however they can. And so they are notifying essentially ZOG Babylon that guess what? You have to worry about the North Koreans too. They may not go against, and by the way, that missile more than likely does not have a microchip made by, the foundries, the chip foundries in Taiwan. So, I went ahead and wrote an article here, but, pretty well what happens ZOG Babylon is, with that Hurricane Ira or Hurricane Ian. What happens, you end up having the Negroes and the Mexicans whining that white people, the old white people are getting more FEMA money here, and the answer is that their properties are worth more. What happens, a property where you have Negroes and Mexicans are not worth as much because it's filled with Negroes and Mexicans here. People don't want to live there. They don't want to live around these crime areas here. So they'll get more help here. But eventually you end up having these hurricanes, and guess what? There won't be no help to spare. It's sort of like Sandy, sort of like, Sandy was sort of fixed because it was New Jersey. But you're going to have less and less and less ability to even take care of business, to take care of food, to take care of anything in the ZOG land. And so what the Koreans did is they went ahead and fired another, probably a newer, improved missile which can have a nuclear tip on it. No problem. And so you end up having them, you end up having the commenters, even at the Wall Street Journal, run around like chickens with their heads cut off here. What happens, what North Korea could do, is it could go ahead and keep intact. And what it could do is it could go ahead and Russia could just simply have them make a whole bunch of 152 millimeter artillery shells. Lots of them. Lots of them. And artillery howitzers here. Just use the same old one from what? The last one was 1987 that they made here. Or they can go ahead and make maybe slightly newer, but same barrel. 152 millimeter barrel, and go ahead and make more and more and more shells. And in return, what the Russians can do is send them steel. And send, I think North Korea got plenty of coal. But they can go ahead and send them, pretty well the materials and food. And pretty well just have these Koreans, instead of, working some of them on the rice paddies here, they can go ahead and work some of them. And what happens, they should go ahead and keep low-grade agriculture, because they will, essentially by not letting them have too much TV or whatever here, internet, they can not only keep an eye on it, they can go ahead and keep, them back on the farm, then just go ahead and have a bus to take them to the munitions factory. So pretty well North Korea could become the arsenal of Russia in some cases for the very simple things here. But not so much the simple things. That missile didn't need to use a Western ship to go ahead and be aimed and fired at all. And increasingly, what I see is Russia and China. Russia providing China with, extra food. Russia and China, timber, whatever, energy, coal. Going ahead and providing them with fuel. And, and raw materials. And China becoming the factory of Asia, along with Iran, along with Korea. So pretty well you can end up having an axis of Russia, China, Korea, North Korea, Iran, and then the satellites, the rest of the stands, and maybe go ahead and add India. And what happens by going ahead and cutting off the fuel to Europe, to Germany? You can go ahead and turn Europe back into a backwater, unless they go ahead and ditch ZOG. And I think at the very end, both Putin and Z can go ahead and come up with their own Putin-Z doctrine, which will be the antithesis of the Monroe Doctrine, to where, guess what, the world island of Eurasia might be besieged by the world ocean, or Oceanus of ZOG. And what you see is that you see pretty well the United States. I mean, they had a big thing about how the DEA let a fentanyl dealer. He was bringing in panels of pressed fentanyl tablets here. He's going to go ahead and go after the other ones. And what happens? He threw off the tracker, and immediately disappeared between Colorado and Indiana. Folks, guess what? ZOG Babylon is comprised of essentially greedy, stupid individuals. And, you know, just like Mencken said, America's the one place where they went from barbarism, you know, savagery, to degeneracy in the space of 1 or 2 degenerations here. And that's the case here. What I see, Zog Babylon, is essentially places like Northeast Ohio going ahead and siding with South Dakota courts to go ahead and take the property of white supremacists, i.e. me. And then on us turn saying, hey, look, Wiggers, you go ahead and you do evil shit, you need to die. I think that the salvation of the white race will be pretty well making regime criminals, judges, lawyers, police, and the rest here, the ones who are trying, you know, to do the work of the Jews, to go ahead and make them eat their spawns nuts here. But, you know, today, by talking about North Korea firing a missile of their own manufacture, and possibly mostly of their own design, and having it run real successful after 5 years absence here. Guess what? North Korea doesn't need ZOG. The reason they have those nuclear weapons is to maintain their independence as a people. And that's, in many cases, I hear that's what the South Koreans think of the North Koreans. They view North Korea as a reservoir of Korea genetic purity. I mean, no dictatorship. No dictatorship wants to go ahead and destroy its own people, except the ZOG dictatorship, which wants to go ahead and destroy white people, and is aimed at doing that. So this is pretty well what I tell these judges, these lawyers, these politicians. You are out to serve the work of Satan. You are out to destroy our people under color of freedom. Freedom, come, freedom. Well, here I am. I'm living in some sort of freedom. I don't have my inheritance because guess what? Brian Rio, who is working as an agent provocateur, decided to take it off here. You know, this is day 2 of the Oath Keepers trial. Probably what I would have said right then and there is that, guess what? The Declaration of Independence says that I can overthrow you bastards anytime I feel like it. And how to destroy you is to pretty well, make you eat your spawns nuts. If you eat your spawns nuts here, you'll do whatever the hell else here. You know, now that you're a eunuch, and your spawn are all eunuchs, and your daughters are walking wombs, why, hey, I mean, it's better than putting salt on a sparrow's tail in order to catch the sparrow here and have it as a pet here. You know what I mean? You make them eat their spawns nuts, why, guess what? You'll have freedom from police, from council critters, from politicians, from judges, from lawyers, all out to go ahead and steal and live off of you, pretending you have freedom. What happens is you'll have freedom. And the question I have is, well, what are you going to do with it? So in any case, this Pastor Mark lists that I am running as a write-in candidate for United States Senate because I'm not allowed to run on the primary, open primary ticket, because, the Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, and Conservation Party don't believe in freedom, at least not for white men. And so, I'm pretty well asking you here to send a few ZOG bucks my way. I know the people who will send it will be the ones who can spare it the least. But even so, here I could go ahead, although I'm still munching down this burnt chili I canned about 6 years ago, back when I had money. You know what I mean? They'll buy a whole bunch of cheap hamburger and put it together here. So it's sort of salty and has a burnt taste to it, but guess what? Yeah. You go ahead and mix some beans with it, it tastes okay. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead. and say, this is Pastor Mark Lindstedt. You can go ahead and send some ZOG bucks to LINDSTEDT to 338 Rabbit Track Road, which is post office is next to the Hippo, or to P.O. Box 666. Same post office that Dr. William Pierce, Fearless Leader, used here. Granby, Granby, Missouri, 64844. So, until later, talk to you later. Here, this is the 4th of October, 2022. Hail Victory.